Drew Winchowski. I'm part of the MarketLogic Solutions engineering team. I actually was a customer for a very long time on the publishing side. See a lot of familiar faces and friends here. And I cut my teeth on a lot of that, and a lot of it has to do with content production, strong data foundations, and semantics. And it's kind of interesting how all that's cool again now, right? Before, everybody's really trying to do applications and APIs and reports and analytics before with just a goal to get a piece of paper out or get a report up to upper management, right? But us as publishers, as media companies and content producers, we're sitting on a treasure trove of information that has a whole new use now. So that really leads us to new opportunities to explore, learn, and grow. And AI has been changing the way how we do a lot of things. We heard this morning from the Associated Press on, auto shot listings, translations, and bringing AI in as a tool for the content production side of it, not just relying on it and sending it out. Companies like Cengage, again, with the AI assistants, and many other platforms starting to integrate AI into their everyday workflows and products. But there are some challenges with that. As we heard famously, there has been many lawsuits going on in the industry about fair use of content, right? There's copyrighted material being used to support these AI trainings and models. Here's a really good article from The Wire and Reuters talking about all the open lawsuits against this. And even though the AIs are being trained on content we know, there are still limitations around hallucinations, around incorrect citations of information. Where did you get that information from? And that causes some issues here, and we're going to address that with a few different patterns that we're going to discuss a little bit later in the presentation. But another thing to be careful about is evolving laws and regulations. The EU has put out a very important act around how to use AI and what are the ramifications for using it. The United States actually has not come up with a whole act yet, and it's going on an individual state-by-state basis actually now. And the major thing in the United States is AI-generated content is not copyrightable, right? There has to be a human editing that content, being in that process to make that content copyrightable and your IP. Even when you may have heard of prompt engineering, the way to generate this content, the prompts that you generate and the way that you talk to the AI to build this content is also not copyrightable in the United States. I'm not a lawyer, don't take my word for as legal advice, but there are many cases out there over there. And there's been initiatives and laws out in place now to clearly mark content. In China, they require clear marking on any content that has been generated by AI. And this has led to many different guidelines, standards being developed. You heard a little bit about C2PA this morning, the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity. They have ways of generating metadata and digital fingerprinting of content to ensure that it has not been modified or produced by AI. Publishers and consortiums are setting guidelines and standards. The IPTC, that's a very popular standards committee for news publications, have published a set of guidelines. And then individual publishers like Associated Press, New York Times, Wiley, et cetera, have also set guidelines on what ways to use AI and how they are going to ship content using AI. And a lot of this has to do with a strong foundation. We heard Rodney talk about, splitting up the consumption and production side of the content creation pipeline and the publishing and the products. And it is like a supply chain, right? Thinking it as a content supply chain, a media supply chain, And how do we do this? And MarkLogic, we take this approach of connect, create, consume. So connecting to many different systems. As you know, content is produced in many different formats, whether it's coming in from a Word doc from the author of the paper. It may be coming in from a news feed. You may have several content management systems or media asset management systems in your organizations. All those systems have different formats, different schemas, different standards that they adhere to, and different levels of quality. Not only about the shapes and sizes of that data, they're multilingual. They have various needs in terms of the language that they support and the audience that they try to target. And some of these bits of content come from very old systems or very new systems, all different types of workflows and applications. So what you do with that, and to kind of corral all that, just trying to develop a really large schema up front is costly, doesn't really lead to anything, right? So bringing that content in as is and starting to enrich it and building it for your end consumption model is the way to go. So you think about adding context into your records, right? Whether it's metadata that you're tagging on those records, whether it's just information, like maybe you have a research article, who are the authors, what are the institutions that they're part of, things like that, adding that in. And then monitoring that kind of content creation, contextualization of the content is important during this phase, right? The data quality markers that we talked about, securing things, data can go to certain providers, they can go to certain distribution partners. Only certain people can see content at certain points in time. So that's all part of that content creation side of things. And then finally, the consumption patterns. Not only that the data is in different shapes and sizes, the way people want to use that data is in really different ways too. So thinking about the traditional search paradigm, people come into Google and type a keyword, or you may be on your website looking for stuff. That's one consumption pattern to get to that data, and it has to be in a shape for that. But you may want to be packaging that data up for licensing or distribution to another person, right? Or maybe you're looking at the data that you have for better ad targeting, right? You're going to look at that content in a different way. So more of about intelligence or analytics. And then what we're all excited about, maybe, is AI, right? That's a whole new consumption pattern. How you're going to feed that content into AI, and how is it going to, how are you going to make sure that you're delivering quality and context to the AI to make the informed decisions and synthesize answers. So you heard Brenda talk a little bit about Progress Data Platform. For folks that don't know or only use one component of it today, it's really at its core is the two main components is MarkLogic as the multi-model database, storing that information, giving you the tools to curate it, and then Semaphore as applying the semantic AI, categorizing it, classifying the content, and organizing it. So at the end of the day, you're really building what we call a multi-model knowledge graph, and you're bringing together interconnected facts that you know about the world around you, along with the information. That's quite different from a lot of other solutions that are on the market, where you're storing data for that particular shape. And that gets you to that enables those different consumption patterns that we just talked about and drives those end business outcomes. And a lot of that is done through metadata, right? And how we approach it is in very different ways. There's information that fits into different models. So a knowledge graph or a semantic graph is great for expressing facts and information about interconnected things. You can think about an author that co-authored a paper may have worked at an institution before together. How do you do those hops to see, oh, maybe we should introduce this person to somebody else? Maybe we can collaborate in a particular area of study that that hasn't happened before. That kind of information can be in a knowledge graph, or the interactions of drugs, as we saw earlier in the presentations. documents are really good for storing that really highly structured or semi-structured content, right? It's, articles, content, and information that's coming in, whether it is in XML or JSON in nature. And you can pick the storage paradigm that's best for your content. So we had some conversations earlier on the side here is, JSON is really great for APIs and integrations and things, but storing that metadata, namespacing it, XML is really great for that, and ensuring that you can have all that additional markup and really presentational information to go along with your content. And then finally, the kind of the analytical workloads is where you want to target particular areas, get roll-ups of information. You may want to see what the distribution of your content is across your organization, what publications they're coming from, or what particular topical areas you're looking for. And that's information that you can give to, say, a salesperson, and that's going to work on getting new advertisements for your website or for your print publications and things like that. And that metadata, after you decide where it goes, comes in different flavors, right? So passive metadata is really about the data that comes in from systems. So descriptive information from what source it came from, or what content production system it came from, pickup system. Administrative stuff about who created this bits of content, where, what time of day it was created, et cetera, and then the structural information. The semantic information and metadata really comes from those relationships. How does the content relate to other things? What are the topical areas that it's about? What are the key concepts and the aboutness of this bit of information that we're tracking? Active metadata is really more about the information that changes over time, right? So content analysis and data mining, or governance flags, whether does this have PII or GDPR constraints, or even things like alerts and recommendations where you may want to record that types of information. And then finally, augmented metadata, really about kind of the life cycle of the content as it goes through the content supply chain, right? So what data orchestration tools has this content been touched by? What's the provenance of this information? And a lot of this is enabled by semantic technologies. And we're going to get a little bit into what semantic technologies are. And it's really about exploring meaning and defining what the world around you is, right? There's different ways to do this. And with Semaphore, we do this through a few different ways. We go through modeling and defining our world around us and how we see it and how we interact with it. We can integrate with other systems and share that, right? You don't want to define the world around you in a room, right? It's all about collaboration, working with other people. And then finally, after you get that information and have that model, how do you drive that metadata back into your content, right? So that's part of the content classification workflows, understanding how you can dynamically tag information as it's going through its life cycle. And before, it was really all keyword based, right? People would go in, you would have author supply keywords or people tagging things with hashtags, et cetera. But you got to think it about as things and not strings, right? Keywords change over time. People don't spell things the same way, right? People may refer to stuff in several different ways to express a concept, for example. And that's where concepts come in. And if you're looking at knowledge management paradigms, a way of doing this is to define a concept and use that concept to organize your data, right? So things like, I'm going to mark this article as news, or this is about a sporting event, or this is mentions a particular chemical compound or product, right? And while you use the concept, you can use different terminology, and that's okay. People speak different languages, right? There's different meanings. There may be the colloquial term of a word versus the scientific term of the word. And then finally is about the relationships. How do these concepts interact with each other? How do they linked? Like one of our favorite demos to do is around space missions, right? So a particular rocket was part of a mission, right? An astronaut crewed a mission. And those relationships, how each of these concepts interact with each other, is where the meaning and knowledge really comes from. So where you had isolated and independent data before, now it gets interconnected into semantic knowledge graph. And this is where a lot of this capabilities and how we feed GenAI will come into play. We're going to jump into Semaphore a little bit and go in through a demo. So what you're greeted with here is the start screen of it, and we're broken into the 3 areas: modeling, classifying, and integration. And we're going to jump into modeling first and look at what comes from PubMed, medical subject headings. And that's a classification of scientific research where we can categorize information in different hierarchies and relationships. Okay. So as we go through these models, we can either go through workflows or directly into a main model. And you see here we have a hierarchy of terms coming from an industry standard model. You could also start to build these organically from data sources that you have in your institutions as well. Coming into here, we're going to search for the word glucose, and we're going to see a bunch of different terms. And this is where that additional metadata and context comes from, right? Glucose is the preferred terminology. We see it in its hierarchy, but we know there's a bunch of different other ways to talk about it, right? There's how it's related to other terms or other actions. We can give descriptive metadata about it. We can give things like alternate labels and concept identifiers as we tag content. And we can also provide a bit of additional context through definitions. So when people are interacting with the system, they can see the definitions. They may see the chemical compound of that item. And that's where we start to build that broader sense of knowledge, right? So adding that context into things. So just having a label isn't sufficient anymore. You need all that additional information to add context, especially in the world of generative AI. So once we get to a place where we like this, we can see how it interacts with other concepts within our area of study or area of focus. And we can start to traverse through those graphs and understand how things are interconnected and related. We can then publish this information. We can publish this information to those other paradigms that we talked about, specifically the classification and integration areas. And this will really help with our next steps. So as part of the content production workflow, we have content coming in different shapes and sizes, as we talked about a little earlier. What we're going to look at in a little bit is how we're going to take a bit of article, a bit of content, and use this model to add context to it. So this is an analyzation tool that we have. We can drop in documents and start to build out terms. And that model now dictates what we have in this record, right? So we do the traditional natural language processing over these records, but now we're using that model and what we defined in that model to determine what this article is about. It's also finding evidence within this article to see the different relationships between those terms to dictate that it's about something else. And you don't have to model everything in the world, right? People's names changes, organizations change. This is more of a formalized modeling area, but you could do syntactic analysis over content, looking for things like parts of speech and stems. You can even do things like name entity recognition and start to tag that additional metadata. And again, the content on its own is very powerful, but adding in that metadata is one of the first steps to getting content prepared for really valid generative AI use cases. So what is GenAI? It's in the common terminology that everybody uses today. I think my toothbrush this morning had AI built into it. It's everywhere, right? And it means something different to everybody. So we're going to walk through a little bit about use cases in GenAI. How do we approach it, and what are some of the limitations? But specifically, AI has been around for a long time. And there's all different types of domains of study. But GenAI has became very popular in the last couple of years. There's a quick little legal disclaimer. We don't provide the AIs themselves, so make sure when you use those that you read their terms and conditions. That's got to be up there for legal. But there's a lot of different examples and use cases. Publishing in media, content summarization, we talked about that earlier, right? Virtual assistants, where you're not giving the answer directly to a student, right? You want to help them learn about a particular piece of content or domain of study. Content generation and production, maybe you are looking for some additional headlines. You want to generate a few different ones and then go through a review with your editors to see which one fits the best for that piece of content. And then editorial tools to help and as part of that review process and et cetera. Manufacturing, healthcare, pharmaceuticals, and banking are also using AI and generative AI in all different ways, right? We've been working a lot with research organizations that use content from these research domains to develop new drugs or develop new chemical products. So GenAI has helped in a multitude of ways to accelerate product development, but there's limitations with it. So you may have heard of hallucinations, data biases, lack of understandings, and cutoffs. And a lot of this is because models are trained on public data sets, right? The majority of time, those data sets are open in the public web. That's what they use. They scrape the web to get this information and train the models. There's more specialized ways to train models, but that takes a certain level of skills, a certain level amount of investment into that process to start training models on your own. So there are different ways that we can mitigate these risks using the content we already have. And one of the most valuable ways that we've seen is to add context, right? Is to provide that information with all the additional information about our domains to the AI, right? So they may not have seen that particular journal article that was behind a paywall. They may not have seen that patent before you filed it, right? How do we get to that to those end goals? And adding context to the GenAI, we're going to add context to the GenAI. And what you need to know about GenAI, it's really a set of algorithms, right? It's not magic in a box. It's computation that happens, and it's a statistical analysis of content and tokens that predict the next word or the next thing or the next image. We're going to look at a little bit of a use case here. This is a paragraph about glucose monitoring. And you see there's items highlighted in here. And what we do with these is convert these into tokens. And tokens, like in this case the word "the," gets converted into an embedding. And an embedding is a set of numbers. And the set of numbers, we index it. We index that content. You may have heard a lot about vector databases of recent, and vector capabilities and vector algorithms. That's another way of searching for content and consuming it, right? That's more of a machine-to-machine way of consuming that content. And that's important too, but you don't want to leave all the other tools that we have on the table, right? Looking at this as a hybrid approach is really the way to go. And one of the limitations with these AI models is that these token windows and the context that you can give it is limited, right? You can't throw the whole world of knowledge at it with every single question, right? You need to find what the most relevant content is for that particular question. So there is a paradigm called retrieval augmented generation, or RAG. And this is where you have a long-term memory store, whatever your content repository is, to supplement the GenAI. You're going to give it that context to answer those questions. And a traditional RAG approach takes that information from a long-term store, maybe in a database, maybe vectors, and feeds that to the GenAI. But how about the world of semantics? We just went through a process of how we defined all that information about the world around us, right? Why don't we use that rich metadata to help us find things? So our approach has been around using MarkLogic as that private document repository, but also introducing Semaphore to classify and augment that data with the knowledge graph capabilities. So when we bring that content in, we also classify it. We add that metadata, add that additional context to those records, and store that information in the records. So when a user comes and queries the system, we can look for that content. And that's where we do the mixture of lexical search, knowledge graph search, and vector re-ranking. So we take information from there, we classify the user's query, we find the most relevant content, and we provide that to the GenAI, the content plus the context, because the context is important, right? We talked a little bit earlier about a caption on a photo could be malicious, right? We want to ensure that our content that we're sending over is of quality along with the context. And then finally, we give an answer. And this has been shown to really increase accuracy and lower costs and the need for really high levels of expertise and training and things like that. So we're going to give a little demonstration more on the content consumption side of things and how that data is going to come into play. So vast amounts of information locked in silos hurts everybody. We all know this, right? And there's lots of content production systems and lots of ways to generate content these days from humans, right? And what we do is typically we throw it under a desk or have our own favorite tool that we want to use to produce that content. And larger organizations, that becomes problematic, right? You have scientists working on a problem and they got to go call somebody else for a particular bit of research, and they have that PDF in an email somewhere that they've just finished that study. Or somebody's just sending over an Excel spreadsheet with information that you need. That data is in different formats, right? And there's different shapes and sizes. We're going to look in this particular case, research articles from PubMed. It's coming from a bunch of different journals, but organized by NIH. And we're going to improve our data exploration and enhance our usability with AI for these applications. So we want to make sure that we can handle this complex multi-model data. We want to go across a common set of terminology and vocabulary as we defined in Semaphore earlier. We're going to look at the data in different ways, right? Whether it's our traditional searching, whether we're going to go through a more browse and exploration way of things. And that really helps with the kind of self-service aspects of things. You know, wouldn't have time to innovate if we have somebody knocking on our door every time they want a report or a piece of content. And then finally, we want to save some time and enhance workflows with AI. So going through this view, we're just going to do a Google-like search first. And we're going to search for glucose and GLP-1s, right? So this is a paradigm that's pretty popular right now. A lot of research going into it. And we can see here that we have content and quick aggregations on it, right? How do we slice and dice that information? And that's where the metadata comes from, right? How do we categorize this content? It's by particular journals. We organize them. We organized it by descriptors. In this case, I'm faceting down to biomolecules and only looking for those two articles, right? We have rich information there by titles, authors, abstract information. But we also have that context that we defined in our model, because we can see and analyze what the user is searching for and bring that additional context up to them, right? Provide a description, provide the chemical compound as we see it, and really enhance their usability. So they may not know about a particular domain of study very well, or they may not know about this bits of content. And then going into the content, right, we have this context. We have these vectorizations that we did of the information. How can we enhance their experiences, right? Well, maybe let's short circuit things and generate summaries based off of the content that is just refined down into. So we can generate a summary send that information with the context to the GenAI, and provide an answer back. And again, trust but verify, right? You want citational information coming back to you to what this content has been, what content was used to produce these answers. So we're going to jump into the article now and really look at it. And through that analysis and through that content creation, we now see where this bit of content fits in the world around you, right? We have the content itself tied to that knowledge graph. This article has information, things like the peptides that were associated that they tested, and the additional higher level concepts and roll-ups to that information. So we're starting to see that information in context. And that context, as we send it to the GenAI, is very important. So as we go through this, and this is a traditional search paradigm, it's great. We can review the articles, we can go in and see things, but we may want to do more of an exploratory view of the content, right? Go through particular areas of study that we're interested in and look for things. And this is where that knowledge graph comes in. We can start to drill down into those particular areas, right? So the medical subject headings, we can start to drill down and go into the chemicals and drugs and look for things like enzymes and start to pull in content that is directly correlated to that concept or its children's concepts, right? We can do that search term expansion and find everything we know about this particular domain of study along with the content, and then further refine down as the researcher may want to get more specific. So as we pull this information up, now we can start to go into the content and see it in that context, review it, and see exactly what we're looking for per that particular domain now. And if you want to start to do more of a traditional analytical workflow, what do? You go and put a view over that. But MarkLogic has the capability of taking that XML or JSON data and projecting it out into SQL views, right? And we can do high-level roll-ups now. So the case where you would originally want to target ads better or maybe package bits of content for a syndication partner, you can get a high-level roll-up of your corpus of data and bring that information to those meetings, right? And get to so we see a lot of these articles are e-published first or ahead of print. Maybe we should focus on online advertisement more than on print advertisement for this case. And again, with this information, we're showing it in a web view, but you can still connect to this with your traditional tooling. So whether you're used to using SQL or using a BI tool like Tableau or PI or Power BI, you can connect to the system and consume that data the way that you want to with the tooling that you're familiar with. And a lot of this helps with the data, in terms of getting it to the fingertips of the people that need it. Again, the self-service discovery. And then finally, around the Q&A and the RAG approach, we're going to jump into that and start to ask questions. So we're going to go in and ask the GenAI a question, and we're going to want to target the data as we said. We're going to look at that question we're going to ask. We're going to look for content about the effects on glucose in mice that are on GLP-1 medications. What happens here? Like, this particular sentence has a lot of key concepts and terminology in it. So based off our knowledge graph, we understand the user's intent. What are they looking for? And we understand that they're looking for glucose in mice and GLP-1 medications and the expanded universe of that information. So we use those hybrid search methodologies to go and find the right content, pull it out, and provide it to the context of the GenAI. And again, with citational links to understand where it's coming from, how it's attributed, etc. So a lot of this, what you saw today, is part of kind of the consumption models and things like that. So the workflows are really important when you're providing this content and producing it to go through, chunk it, vectorize it, add additional context, and classify the metadata. It's all part of that kind of the data stewardship and archival best practices, right? things that are cool are once cool again because of the world of GenAI. So finally, going back to like what we're originally going to show, we eliminate a lot of those data silos, right? Came in from content being produced from all different journals, different areas of study coming into a single hub of information. We ensure everybody's speaking the same language, right? Defining those concepts and curating those areas of study is really important to make sure that people are on the same page, right? Some people may refer to a product as its street name and where you buy it on the store, or they may refer to it as a code name as it's in development, right? So honing in on those concepts, the terminology and vocabulary is really important as you're getting bigger and bigger sets of content. Unlocking that insights through the semantic exploration and search and discovery, really making sense of that deluge of data, that classification and enhancements to the information. And then providing that rich self-service data discovery, whether it's through search or through analytics, guiding your users through the data set is really important. And at the end of the day, your end users are not there to see how cool your platform is or whatnot. They want to get in there, use the content for what they are trying to do, right? Whether they're a researcher, whether they're trying to get what's new in the news, et cetera, right? So providing these kind of fast-tracking tools to get to the content, whether it's through summarization or question and answering and other paradigms, is really beneficial. So finally, like we've helped a lot of our customers. I just wanted to put a quick quote up. This is influential across the organizations, right? So one of our tech leads at a food processing and chemical company said this has changed the way that they look at data, right? And going through these particular workflows and how you archive and classify content as well as curate it makes a big difference, right? You're storing your institutional knowledge that could quite easily be lost, right? So eliminating those data silos, those paradigms is really a key benefit. Unlocking this additional insight and providing full views of the data is powerful. And making it discoverable and well-governed all leads to faster innovation and better management and better product development at the end of the day, right? You want to get to the key business problem before, instead of focusing on the underlying technology, right? So I'll leave it at that. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to go a little deeper and show code or do any of that kind of stuff. Kelly? Yeah, so we have the UI, we have a set of React components now to develop that integrate with MarkLogic. So React is a front-end web technology for developing in JavaScript. So we have components that understand how to work with our APIs to pull data out of the system. So whether it's the search or the graph capabilities, we can go in and start to add those capabilities into existing applications or build standalone applications using that toolkit. Any other questions? No? All right. Well, thanks everyone. If you do want to follow up at all, you can reach me on LinkedIn or reach any of us after the sessions are over today. Thanks.